Today in World Literature, we begin a course of 22 lectures dedicated to 20th century fiction, drama, and poetry, written by writers from Africa and the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. The lectures you are about to see are designed to complement another course in World Literature, in which we focus on writers from North America, Latin America and the Caribbean, and Australia. Together, these two courses present what we hope to be a comprehensive introduction to literature in a global context. As is the case in both courses, our aim in presenting these lectures is to suggest that it is best to view literature as a global phenomenon. Reading literature in a global perspective discourages parochialism, enables the reader to explore diverse cultures, encourages accessibility to these cultures, and fosters a greater sense of humility regarding dominant Eurocentric perspectives. Culture consists mostly of connections, not of separation, Carlos Fuentes tells us. He is correct. In this course, we try to suggest that reading literature in a global context helps us see the interconnectedness of life on this small planet. I begin the first lecture in this course with some facts about global culture which reveal a profound shift away from a solely Western influence in social structure, culture, technology, and institutional arrangements. I explore how the West took command of the world during the period from 1450 through 1650, a period of discovery, expansion, and colonization. I then discuss the benefits and cost of Western dominance. What, we might ask, is our responsibility in needing to know more about world literature, and how should we read this literature when we encounter it? Such are the topics raised in this lecture. We live in the last decade of the second millennium. As we approach the third millennium, facts about global culture come into view. Half the world's population will be Asian, 1/8 will be African. The majority of the world's people will be non-Christian. The largest cities in the world will be neither in Europe nor in the United States. Other facts, too, come into view. The dating system we use, for example, begins with the birth of Christ, a religious event denoting the incarnation of God in human form. This birth is a key reference to the dating system now officially in use all over the world, even though the birth of Christ has no religious significance to many of the world's civilizations using this system. For Asians, Buddhists, Hindus, for Africans, the Igbo of Nigeria, for many of the world's religions, the birth of Christ is not of central significance. It is the religion of a foreign culture. Yet the Western dating system prevails. Why? To begin, there is the narrative fact that the era of European expansionism, the age of Columbus, if you like, was a defining period in world civilization. That story, of course, is known to every school child. In 1492, Columbus's expedition was financed by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. Columbus sailed an ocean as blue as the eyes of the Europeans, with a trinity of ships, and sighting land on October 12th, named the Caribbean people Indians in his mistaken notion that he had reached Asia by sailing west. Within that story is also the symbol of colonization. As Europe exerted dominance over Australia, the Americans in Africa, the West took command of a large part of the world. By the close of the 19th century, India was part of the British Empire, Africa was divided, and the Americas were colonies of Europe. Asia, too, was made the object of industrialization. After several unsuccessful American attempts to establish commercial relations with Japan, Commodore Perry steamed into Edo, now Tokyo Bay, in 1853 and demanded diplomatic negotiations with the emperor. Faced with the brute force of naval bombardment, Japanese officials signed a treaty with the U.S. to open 2 ports and permit trade. China suffered a similar fate when Beijing was occupied between 1856 and 1860 by some 17,000 British and French troops, whose sole intent was to ensure that European merchants had great privilege and protection. Thus did America and European military aggression blow a hole in the walls of Asian sovereignty. The brute force was combined with the argument that Americans and Europeans could and should civilize supposedly primitive non-white people. As Rudyard Kipling put it in 1903, "Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' needs. To wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new-caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child." In all of this, the technology, the economics, the religion, the culture, all were Western European. From our perspective now, living as we do in a period of frank recognition, we have realized both the benefits and the costs of the era of Western dominance. For the first time in history, the world became a single unit. Yet this unity was accomplished by brute technological and economic force. The world responded with a nationalist, anti-imperialist struggle for independence and cultural dignity, a struggle which persists today. In this situation, as Kwame Anthony Appiah and Henry Louis Gates Jr. write in the Dictionary of Global Culture, we all participate, albeit from a different cultural position, in a global system of culture. That culture is increasingly less dominated by the West, less Eurocentric, if you like, and so there must be more and more people in the West like ourselves who are both aware of their ignorance of the many of other traditions and want to know more. This need to know more is the basis for this course in contemporary world literature. In this course, we look to the literature of Europe, of Africa and the Middle East, and of Asia. What should we read? From Europe, we might begin by reading something from Czechoslovakia's Franz Kafka. From France, we might look to Albert Camus or Marguerite Duras. Great Britain offers D.H. Lawrence, Virginia Woolf. Ireland offers William Butler Yeats and James Joyce. From Italy, there is Calvino and Umberto Eco. From Poland, the dark fiction of Bruno Schulz and the haunting poetry of Czesław Miłosz. From the former Soviet Union, there is Tatiana Tolstoya. From Switzerland, the philosophic drama of Frederick Dürrenmatt. Most of this writing, as we shall see, rejects the notion of a common reality and instead examines private consciousness. The shaping of this consciousness, whether from unique individual thought or from social awareness, is the basis of this European literature. What should we read from Africa and from the Middle East? From Nigeria, there is Chinua Achebe's 1959 classic novel, Things Fall Apart. From South Africa, there is Nadine Gormez's stories of interracial relations. From Egypt, we might do well to look to the work of Naguib Mahfouz, the 1988 winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. From Israel, there is the poetry of Yuda Amahi and the fiction of Amos Oz. The literature of Africa often focuses on the recollection of a vibrant and rich way of life that was once uncontaminated by colonialism and by imperialism. There are also critiques of the post-independence period in which the traditional and modern compete with one another. The literature of the Middle East, of North Africa, is often as diverse as the ethnic groups that inhabit that region. As we read these writers, we will be better able to see the social, religious, and political life of the region, as well as the conflicts, both intellectual and gender-based, that writers face during periods of social turmoil. What should we read from Asia? From China, there are the early classic stories of Lu Xun and the contemporary films, such as Raise the Red Lantern. From Japan, there is the fiction of Yukio Mishima and Moriyoki. From Indonesia, there is the work of Pramodia Tour. From India, there is the fiction of R.K. Narayan and Salman Rushdie. In reading this literature, we will see that many of these writers consciously adapt a political position, often protesting feudalistic forces in their society and championing the poor and the underclass. Tour, for instance, spent years in prison for his novels of social protest. Other writers, such as Mishima, however, will turn the tension between Western and Japanese cultures and often celebrate instead a traditional way of life. As our need to know more brings us to this literature, how should we approach it? That is, how should we read it? The question is deceptively simple. We should read, we might first answer, as we always have. Pencil in hand, we will chart the narrative, define point of view, seek out the symbol. If it is a drama, we'll think about characterization and motive. If it is a poem, we'll figure out the figurative language. This is the way that literature is analyzed in the college classroom, and it yields a well-received product, the essay. With a few good references thrown in for good measure, we may even have the term paper. Yet, does our need to know more compel us to approach this literature differently? Let us take an example. In each of these Things Fall Apart, the author describes a pre-colonial society for over half the novel. In describing the Igbo culture of Nigeria, Achebe tells us about the Chi, a personal god who goes with each individual, about life in an obi, a large living quarters of the head of the family, about the importance of yams to culture in general, and to Okonkwo, the novel's main character, specifically. Character, the usual symbol safari that we often conduct in the college classrooms won't help us much here. Another type of approach will have to be used, one that we are not used to employing, stark curiosity, for example. We must read not only to see a symbol, but to discover the intricacies of a culture. In this mode of inquiry, different questions are asked. For example, what is meant by pre-colonial society? By post-colonial society? How does language reveal culture? How are families and communities established and preserved? What forces threaten communities? What is the nature of nationalism and political consciousness? What is the exile and refugee condition? Are cross-cultural issues present? Let's go back to one of these. How does language reveal culture? And turn for a moment to Czesław Miłosz's My Faithful Mother Tongue. Let me read the poem, and let's take a look at the ways in which language reveals culture here. Faithful mother tongue, I have been serving you. Every night I used to set before you little bowls of colors so you could have your birch, your cricket, your finch as preserved in my memory. This lasted many years. And you were my native land, I lacked any other. I believed that you would also be a messenger between me and some good people, even if there were few, 20, 10, not born as yet. Now I confess my doubt. There are moments when it seems to me I have squandered my life. For you are a tongue of the debased, of the unreasonable, hating themselves even more than they hate other nations, a tongue of informers, a tongue of the confused, ill with their own innocence. But without you, who am I? Only a scholar in a distant country, and success, without fears, humiliations. Yes, who am I without you? Just a philosopher, like everyone else. I understand this is meant as my education. The glory of individuality is taken away. Fortune spreads a red carpet before the sinners in a morality play, while on the linen backdrop a magic lantern throws images of human and divine torture. Faithful mother tongue. Perhaps, after all, it's I who must try to save you. So I will continue to set before you little bowls of colors, bright and pure if possible, for what is needed in misfortune is a little order and beauty. Three things are going on here, all of them complex. To begin, there's a relationship in the poem of language and culture and identity. Two, moreover, there's expression here of the redemptive power of poetry. Faithful mother tongue is how the poet addresses his own language. He serves up, as in an offering, little bowls of colors, that is, his own poems. He's also in doubt throughout the poem of the relationship between language and his own individuality, which he would like to have, but he realizes that he also belongs to a more common culture. And so the poem also becomes something, thirdly, about exile. We might turn, for example, to another poem, Bertolt Brecht's To Posterity, to find a similar sort of treatment, but not one in which language is seen as the key to culture and relationship and identity. And so it is that we're arguing that as these questions are posed, answers come from different kinds of questions than those which we usually look for in literature. As well, I think we're responsible to try to ask these questions communally and try to answer them in a group. After all, the instructor in a classroom isn't the sole source of knowledge and authority. Today's classrooms are multicultural, international, Much insight often rests with the students. In writing the paper, which will be the subject of another of our lectures, students may want to examine voice writing, a kind of paper in which the student interprets a work in terms that are both analytic and personal. If all of this seems different, well, that's part of the burden of needing to know more. To know more, we must both experience new literature and discover different ways of asking and answering questions. It is, I think, such ways of asking and answering questions perceptively that led Professor Nikki Stiller, in a lecture that you'll see in this series on Russian writing, to state that Russian prose fiction has reflected the extremes endemic to Russian society, the most outrageous wealth and the most horrific poverty. A worship of the West and a loathing of it all and all that it represents, the most exquisite sensibility to beauty in nature and the most ferocious cruelty, the greatest concern for justice and the most palpable contempt. These are the contradictions of humanity in general, Professor Stiller says. One might say, however, that while everyone is human, the Russians are a little more so. Professor Stiller tells us to stand ready to embrace contradiction in order to get to the heart of the matter. If this is hard work, well, that too is part of the need to know. We read to discover intricacies. What may seem apparent is, after all, not so simple. Take, for example, social systems, individuals and groups, populations, and their characteristics. With some effort, we may see the complexity of social systems by thinking of their anatomy. Sociologist Charles L. Harper provides a model. Look, he suggests, to the social structure. What is the status, the structure of the individual in the system, and what is the role, the behavior of that individual? After examining the status role concept, we may also examine the culture of a social system. What do people know about their world? What are their benefits and values and attitudes? How are people expected to behave? And what are their technologies? Third, we might investigate the interlocking arrangements of social institutions. What is the economy of a group? How do individuals provide order and resolve conflicts? How do people care for each other in family life? What is the educational system? And what is the religion of a social system? Harper helps us ask searching questions about social systems, and these questions may help us approach the study of world literature. Often, in the beginning of a course, students have trouble getting started. One way to proceed is to read a particular selection and ask strategically planned questions about the social system described in the literary work. Take, for example, Nadine Gordimer's short story, A Soldier's Embrace. Gordimer, the 1991 winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, is a South African writer whose stories explore apartheid, a social and political policy of racial segregation and discrimination enforced by white minority governments in South Africa from 1948 to 1994. This short story examines the nature of interracial relations after a liberation movement achieves power. What do questions about the status role concept tell us about the liberal white lawyer in the story and his wife? About the newly liberated Africans? What is the culture of the social system? And how do the social institutions remain interlocked at the end of apartheid, the central event in the story? Indeed, for background to the apartheid, you may even wish to consult Basil Davidson's Let Freedom Come, Africa in Modern History, a study of anti-colonial struggles. Such questions will help you get started reading world literature. While other questions may be asked, it is good to begin by examining the complexity of social systems, in that such questions allow us to understand that there are no immutable social truths when it comes to reading literature. The way we read is itself a political construction, and so it is best to map the domain of these social structures in the beginning.